Hey everyone, and welcome to my first video on the arguments against evolution. I'm going to split this up into several videos, just makes it easier to deal with each of these subjects. So some of these might be pretty short. To start though, I will say this. If you believe you have an argument that's drop dead, no problem, proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that evolution cannot possibly be true, you're wrong. And I can actually say two things about you. Assuming, of course, you're being intellectually honest. First, you don't understand evolution. And second, you don't understand your own argument either. Now, a fantastic example of this is the video that I'm going to link below by a YouTuber known as White Rabbit. And it's called The Greatest Lie Ever Told. I still can't say that without laughing. And this is a really perfect example of how ignorance of a subject can lead you, down the rabbit hole, frankly. So to illustrate this, I'm going to start with one of the simplest arguments to debunk that there is. And while we're going through it, as well as all the subsequent videos, please keep in mind there is a very common theme in all of these, and that is simple lack of understanding. Also, while I've tried to simplify these arguments as much as possible, there's only so much that can be done in that regard while retaining the meaning of the argument. So at that point, if you still don't understand why the arguments don't hold any water, if you still don't understand why they don't mean anything, I'd suggest go onto YouTube, go onto Google, and start looking for more information on these things. There's tons of it out there, and just as long as you can find a reputable source, you'll probably be able to figure things out. Now, the key there is a reputable source. Trying to learn biology, for instance, from somebody who has zero education is a really bad idea. So you have to make sure that you consider the source and that you get multiple sources confirming what you're learning. So having said all that, time for argument number one. Yes, it's the second law of thermodynamics. I have heard this argument trotted out so many times it's ridiculous, and it annoys the hell out of me every time. And that's just one simple reason. It's stupidly simple once you understand the second law of thermodynamics to understand why this argument completely falls apart. But the people making this argument obviously have zero knowledge of the second law of thermodynamics, and they're just regurgitating an argument they've heard from somebody else who also obviously didn't have a clue what the hell they were talking about. So first thing we're going to do is go through what the second law of thermodynamics actually says. The law says the sum of the entropies of all participating thermodynamic systems always increases. That doesn't usually help very much. So we're also going to go through what it actually means. And as an aside, show me any video of people arguing against evolution who are willing to actually go through and explore and try to understand what this law actually means. You won't find any. And that's really key to all of these arguments. If you don't understand the aspects of your own argument, then you're not actually making an argument. You're just spouting nonsense and making noise. But put as simply as possible, the second law of thermodynamics means that heat always flows from hot to cold. It's energy equalization is really what it's getting at. And the reason that this occurs is that there's only so much energy to go around, which is the first law of thermodynamics. That's how they're connected. Now, when you initially hear this, you might think, that doesn't sound like such a bad argument. I mean, after all, evolution calls for complexity. It calls for energy, more energy being, brought together and stored up in individuals or in animals or, life forms. And the second law of thermodynamics seems to suggest that that's probably not possible. But there's a condition on the second law of thermodynamics, and this is where the understanding comes in. It's not just a matter of you can't put energy together or you can't bundle energy up. You have to take into account what the law actually says and understand it. And the law says that you have to take into account all participating thermodynamic systems. So, as an example, say you're in a hot air balloon. You're a few hundred meters above the surface of the Earth, and you're floating along quite nicely. If you take as your system, or simply just consider the air inside the balloon, nothing more, just that air, then what can you say about it? It's like, well, energy flows from hot to cold. So the air inside the balloon is hot, air outside the balloon is colder. So the energy flows out of the balloon, which it does. However, drawing the conclusion then that you cannot go up, because in order to do so you have to put more energy inside the balloon and thus increase the discrepancy between the air inside and the air outside, you can't draw that conclusion. It makes no sense. The reason, though, that you can't draw that conclusion is that you're not taking into account all participating thermodynamic systems. The big one that you're missing is the engine. You turn the engine on, huge gouts of flame go up, heats up the air in the balloon, away you go, no problem. So your system of just the air inside the balloon, in essence, is wrong. Or rather, you can't apply the second law of thermodynamics to just that system. You have to include the engine as well. And once you include that engine, the system becomes closed for the most part. And once the system is closed, then the second law of thermodynamics can apply. And the engine generates way more than enough entropy to balance out the heating of the air inside the balloon, and everything is fine. The exact same thing applies to the Earth. The Earth is not a closed system. We get a massive amount of energy on a constant basis from a very powerful and highly entropic source, and it's called the sun. This energy, it allows the plants to grow, it provides warmth and food, and life can quite happily evolve using that energy. And this, because we get this energy from outside, from this massively entropic source, it more than balances any minor reduction in entropy that might result from evolution. So in order to apply the second law, just like with the hot air balloon, you have to include the engine. You have to include all participating thermodynamic systems. And the sun is a big one. So if you're still using this argument, or if you still don't understand why this argument doesn't actually apply, I suggest you go out, do more research. There's tons of videos on YouTube about this stuff, and I'm actually going to link to another video below that I found that's particularly good at explaining how the second law of thermodynamics actually works. The bottom line, though, is that if you're trying to apply the second law of thermodynamics to evolution and isolation, you don't understand the second law of thermodynamics, and what you're trying to do is apply the second law to a situation that it simply doesn't work on.